think the UAW has provided maybe the best recent example of a union that has dramatically sort of raised expectations by saying, look, we're going to go and try to organize every major auto plant and battery plant in the South.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I've heard that we do have Eric on the Zoom, so I want to bring on our guest. Really excited to have Eric Blanc, an assistant professor of labor studies at Rutgers University. He is the author of We Are the Union, How Worker-to-Worker Organizing is Revitalizing Labor and Winning Big, as well as Red State Revolt, the Teachers' Strike Wave, and Working Class Politics. Eric, thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned to listeners as you were coming on the Zoom that we've been talking a little bit about organizing and what organizing looks like here over the next 4 years. And you put out a new article. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about this new article. You're making the case that unions should go big, right? So tell us a little bit about that and your case for why unions should go on the offense over the next few years.
Sure. I think, unfortunately, a lot of union leaders are assuming that because Trump got elected, that this means that the most labor can do over the next 4 years is defensive battles to survive. And the problem with that is, first of all, I think it's misreading the terrain. And then second, it's a surefire recipe for actually being as ineffective as possible for actually combating Trump and Trumpism. So let me explain why. It's true that political factors are important for organizing. I mean, it is a reality that Biden's NLRB was a good NLRB and it helped organizing significantly. So that's a real step backwards to not have that. We don't know how long we might still have a pro-union board, but sooner or later it's going to be at best under Republican control and might be dismantled even further. So that does make organizing harder. On the other hand, there's all these other factors that continue to make new organizing, bringing in new members possible and necessary. So one of them is just the general fact that Trump got elected in large part due to economic anger, and his policies are going to exacerbate the inequalities and insecurities that he was preying upon. And so unions are really workers' best and major tool for combating the very things that they're hoping to see. But let me put it this way, for winning the things that they might think Trump can deliver, but that actually only collective action from below can deliver. So the contradictions on the economy are remaining strong. Similarly, there's going to be a tight labor market still. We're in a very tight labor market currently, and that's projected to continue for the foreseeable future. And so that gives workers more leverage to go on strike. You're less likely to be scared about risking a job loss by organizing if you might be able to get a similar job down the road at a similar place. And so the tight labor market is another major factor. Also, unions still have a ton of money. This is something that Chris Bonner, a labor researcher, has found. And so he's the co-author with me of this piece. We're talking about almost $40 billion in assets that unions are sitting on that could be used not only to defend against Trump's attacks, because there's going to be major attacks on labor, but to go on the offensive, to fight for new unions, to spread the campaigns that we're seeing at Amazon, UAW across the South. Labor has the money to support these at scale, but it has to make a decision to do so. And so ultimately, that is the big tension, is that there is still space to do new organizing. We know that it's possible to win even under hard political conditions, but it's not clear whether the labor movement as a whole is going to commit to that approach, or whether it's going to continue what it's been doing for decades now, which is sort of defensively hunkering down in the hope that eventually labor law reform will create space for a new dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a few points you made there that I want to dig into a little bit deeper. And this start with the economic conditions, because that's something that Jacob and I have also just sort of noticed as we've had organizing conversations with folks that, if you've got a crappy job, you can find another crappy job. And, there are people who are, I think, a little bit more enticed to organize right now because they sense that if their job is not really all that great, they are more, more likely now than they would have maybe at a previous era to be able to find a, a replaceable job with comparable wages and benefits. And, so the fear of retaliation maybe isn't quite there. It's still such a, a huge factor we deal with, but these economic conditions you're talking about, and also, something you alluded to would be like the disappointment, right? That there are working people, and I've heard from plenty of them who believe, for various reasons, that things are going to get easier for them over the next 4 years, right? That prices are going to go down, healthcare will get better, the economy will be booming, and jobs will grow. Um, Now, you and I have reasons to be skeptical of that, obviously. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more. Could you just tell me a little bit more about how these economic conditions you think play into these organizing conditions?
Sure. So yeah, there's two sides to this. One is just the general economic context of extreme inequality. Like this is the basic fundamental dynamic that is sort of driving forward all of the crises of not just the US, but really across the like capitalist world, right? It just historic levels of inequality is fueling a lot of anger and sort of very justifiable anger. And that can get channeled in different ways. It can get channeled towards scapegoating. It can get channeled into strongmen, or it can get channeled into sort of collective working class action from below. And so that basic condition is not going to be solved by Trump, no matter what. And not just that, his policies are going to tend to exacerbate that, right? We've already seen in the his appointees or his nominees for his cabinet. He's this is an administration of billionaires on behalf of billionaires. So the idea that working people's lives are going to get significantly easier and their economic sort of prospects increase is very unlikely under Trump, given the pro-billionaire sort of nature of what he's about to unload. That's part of it. And then exactly like you said, the tight labor market, though, on the other hand, gives workers more confidence to fight back, right? And so we've seen this across the board. It's really remarkable. You see, across the South, for instance, there's been one of the things I found in the research for my book, there's been just wildcats and sort of working, sort of worker-led strikes across drivers. So a lot of like school bus drivers, different types of drivers, because there's a real shortage of people, particularly in the South, with the license to drive, something like a school bus. So the reality is there's all of these different sectors, retail, logistics, in which the bosses are really they need workers, and workers can sense that. And so that does create a lot of opportunities for organizing. The question is still, are those opportunities going to be seized? Are the unions going to seriously invest in new organizing, or maybe are more left-leaning, bottom-up organizers, workers going to take the initiative on their own and kind of drag the rest of the union movement along with them?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point, and I wanted to touch on that because, as you said, the labor unions do have money, but it is, to be fair, it's split in various, bank accounts between various international unions and then the local unions and various formations, right? So it's not like, this the $40 billion is all sitting in one account and it could just, be tapped into that easily. So could you talk a little bit about like what does that look like in terms of leveraging these resources towards a real concerted effort to organize? What would it take for the unions collectively to kind of all get on board and to make these sort of historic investments?
Yeah, what you said is really important, which it's not just in a bank account, and it's not in the bank account of the AFL-CIO, sort of the National Federation, which actually has, in many ways, the least amount of money and resources compared to the national unions. And then actually most of the money is on the local level. And so we have an extremely decentralized and atomized labor movement in the US, in which the decisions on organizing are predominantly made by all of these autonomous locals. And so that's hard. That's hard to get that whole sort of very messy structure moving in one direction. And it's reasonable for all of these locals to feel like, well, maybe we should sit on whatever, little extra money we have, because, at this point, the most we can do is protect our members. So I don't think it's that people have like bad intentions or anything like this, but just structurally, if labor continues to be in a purely defensive mode, we're going to continue to see a decline in union density, and labor's political ability to sort of shape what's going on in the country is going to continue to diminish. So there is a question then of like, how do you tap these resources? What would that look like? I think we can see some inclination, some instance of what that looks like in by what the UAW has done. I think the UAW has provided maybe the best recent example of a union that has spent, I believe, committed over $40 million to new organizing, and has dramatically sort of raised expectations by saying, look, we're going to go and try to organize every major plant, auto plant, and battery plant in the South, right? Saying very publicly that we want workers to start self-organizing, but also we're going to put real resources to supporting them. So that is the type of practice that unions on a national and local level could be doing. There is just a question of political will to do that. And that is a bit the tension. There is money, but it's going to take a lot of leaders moving that direction and take a lot of pressure, both from above and from below, to get unions to not just sort of continue with being very risk averse. And unions, unfortunately, are very risk averse, and that doesn't lend itself towards bold organizing most of the time.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Yeah, and I think that last point you made was really important. I wanted to pull that out as well, that, if you're listening and you are a rank and file member, you're an officer in your local, a steward in your local, like this is a time to act, and this is a time where you can put that pressure from the local level all the way up to the international. This is an opportunity to really use your voice and to be that squeaky wheel in your capacity, whatever that looks like. If you're a union member and you're hearing this and you think, wow, it does really suck that our union density continues to go down year after year after year. We should do something different. We should really go big. I think to your point, it's going to take a lot of leaders all moving in the same direction. And that includes, folks who are listening to this program, folks who are out there, who are grassroots activists, who can make a difference in their local or in their international or, in their labor council, wherever you can apply pressure, and wherever those resources are that could be being used right now to help workers organize and win power. But this just take for a second, let's assume that, all the union presidents are listening right now and they're all bought in. Appreciate their support. Glad they listened to the Valley Labor Report. They heard Eric. They're now all like buying this argument. They're all in. They're going to invest. So, what would that next step look like? How do you actually organize millions of workers that we're talking about here on this kind of scale?
Right. So that's a great question. And I think one of the mistakes we make in organizing is sometimes underestimating the difference of what it would take to organize millions of workers versus what it takes to win like one drive. Because if you're just organizing one drive or two, it's not a major obstacle if you have a very staff intensive model. If you have a good staff organizer, and I think great sort of paid staff organizers are really important, right? And they can help drive forward a local drive, and you can win that way when you're doing small scale organizing. But there's just not enough staff in the country, and there's not enough people we could hire over the next couple of years to become staff to use that kind of staff intensive model, which normally has about one staffer for every 100 workers targeting. That's sort of the norm in organizing, at least for good sort of effective staff intensive organizing. If you're actually trying to organize millions of workers, which is what it would take literally to reverse the decline in union density, then you have to have different models. You have to find ways to give workers tools to start self-organizing, and you still need resources and you still need staff, but you have to do that in a way that's scalable. And by scale, just that means that can spread as widely as necessary. And that's a different type of model than what we saw, for instance, in the 1990s, in which the sort of resource crunch became a major impediment towards scaling up organizing because it costs so much to organize workers. And so fortunately now, partly because of digital tools, partly because there's so many young radicalized workers out there, there's possibilities to do a different type of model. And so think about, for instance, how Starbucks Workers United took off. So this is one of the most important campaigns of the last few years. And it wouldn't have been possible if they had relied on staff to drive it forward. Think about what happened. In Buffalo, they win a union election in November 2021. To their surprise, thousands of workers across the country are inspired. Hundreds of them start reaching out. And if they hadn't pivoted to a worker-to-worker model in which workers do things that staff normally do, they wouldn't have been able to spread so quickly. So what they did, sort of by necessity, is rather than having a staff person train each new shop that reached out, which just wouldn't have been possible because they didn't have enough staff, they had workers themselves coaching other workers across the country in how to organize and win. So that's different. Most of the time you have a staff organizers coaching every new drive. This time you have workers coaching new drives. So that's a big part of the model. And we've seen that also happening in other unions like the News Guild and to a certain extent UAW. The second piece, I think, of the new model that would make it more scalable and so you could actually organize millions is you have to give workers tools so that they can start self-organizing, right? So that you're not relying on just staff initiation, but that you're encouraging workers to take these first steps. So things like Jane McAlevey, late great Jane McAlevey's done all these massive organizing trainings, with tens of thousands of workers across the US and across the world, teaching them the basics of organizing and saying, go out and do it, right? Unions can and should be doing that. And they can be doing that in conjunction with hiring and encouraging a bunch of SALT. So rather than having a paid full-time staffer, just sort of creating programs in which you could train up thousands of young people in particular to go SALT new strategic workplaces. So that means that they just get a job and try to unionize it. There's all of these ways that you could sort of spur a new approach that isn't as reliant on paid staff. And we are seeing unions already starting to do this to a certain extent, but it's the exception rather than the norm.
Right, right. And yeah, there was a lot there that you just put out, and one thing that you closed with in terms of salting, that's something that, we're certainly interested in as labor folks ourselves. Like, what can we do to build that pipeline given limited resources, right? Like, in our labor council, we don't have a staff. We are all volunteer. And that's, the reality for a lot of organizations, a lot of unions and labor councils and federations. So, that is a way where we can tap into folks. And, something that we didn't talk about in advance, but I know you wrote about this with Red State Revolt and sort of the influence of the, militant minority, so to speak, folks who are more politically minded and engaged, who are, some might say radical or militant, but, these folks who are, by no means the majority, but are kind of a core group of folks, of activists and organizers who seem to be pushing things forward. Could you talk a little bit more about those people and kind of what their role and our role is?
Right. And so, the experience that we can lean on to see what the role of these folks could be. The best experience in the 1930s, where, labor's big breakthrough was driven forward by mostly young, pretty militant, sometimes sort of socialist, communist, anarchist, but oftentimes just sort of militant-minded, people who want to fight the boss, workers on the shop floor who took the risks necessary. And it does take personal risks and a lot of time and effort to cohere the rest of their their coworkers to fight and win. And so the importance of sort of rebuilding a layer of workplace organizers who are very much oriented towards rebuilding a militant labor movement, this is like the crucial thing. And one of the reasons to be optimistic, I think, about the moment we're in is that there is a real radicalization amongst young people across the country in particular. It's not, it's not just young people, but it is disproportionately, after the Great Recession, after things like Bernie Sanders campaign, there's a lot of people who are, understand that the system isn't working for working people and are looking for ways to change it. Maybe they went to Black Lives Matter protests. And I think one of the exciting things about this moment is more and more people are realizing that unless we rebuild a mass, powerful labor movement, all of the things we want to see change, not just economic issues, aren't going to be realizable, whether it's around climate change or racial justice, whatever. If you don't have a strong labor movement, we're not going to be able to win progressive change in the US. And so I think that that realization is out there and growing, but we need to find organizational steps to tap that so that exactly as you mentioned, how can local labor councils, how can local unions have SALT trainings where you don't actually need a lot of resources. You just need to be able to explain what the process of salting is, give workers some ideas and support for where they could go and salt, right? And then give them some encouragement and some networks so that they can continue that organizing, because you can't really sustain that just as an individual operator. It's really important to have people who are doing similar things, either locally or nationally, who you can sort of who you can commiserate with or strategize with. And so I think then the big sort of tactical challenge for the coming period is how do we get all of these folks, people like listening to your show and beyond, to take that step. Either it's organizing their own workplace, right? It's not just salting. You can organize your own workplace. And this militant minority, we've already seen it sort of drive forward an organization that I'm part of and spent a lot of time working with, which is EWOC, Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, which basically supports any worker in the country who wants to organize their workplace. And then this is a project of socialists together with Democratic Socialists of America, together with United Electrical Union, which is one of the most sort of like traditional left-led unions in the country. And so this is the militant minority. These are left-leaning, oftentimes workers and unionists who are trying to support this broad labor resurgence. And so I do think that that layer is both a reason for optimism, because to a certain extent it exists. Labor Notes kind of coheres a lot of this, the Labor Notes conference, but there's so much more out there. I actually think we're only at the tip of the iceberg for being able to connect all the people who understand that labor is important, but to give them very easy on-ramps to get in and support and be part of leading a resurgent labor movement. And I think that actually the task ahead is to make it easier, because a lot of times people support from the outside and don't realize how much of a role they could be playing if they had sort of an avenue to do so.
Yes, yes, yeah. That really, really resonates with me because I have found the same thing, that I think we are sometimes underestimating how many people do really appreciate this, the importance of a revitalized labor movement to saving this country. I think more and more people are waking up to that. But to your point, we've got to have those on ramps for people to actually, feel like they are part of this movement and to participate and to show leadership and feel the comfort to take those risks. To know that people will have their back, to know that there's a point behind it, right? And people aren't going to take a risk unless they think there is something real there that makes it worth it. And, especially here in the South, where hostility to unions is so fierce and overwhelming and, broadly supported by not just the entire business establishment, but the political establishment, even often, the religious establishment. It does take some risk to be outside of that. But yeah, I think that's really important. I think what you're saying, it really does stick with me, because I think more and more folks are waking up, and I think this, it is up to militant-minded folks who want to see things change. If you do believe that things have got to be better, and you see how labor fits into that, you see how building this labor movement is key to winning everything that we need to have a better life for ourselves and our communities, you do have a role to play. And I think that is something that, is worth emphasizing, is that whatever your capacity, it takes all of us doing what we can to win what we need. And whatever your skills are, whatever your talents, your relationships, you've got something to contribute. So I would just encourage people to think about that and how they fit into this, this broader puzzle. So Eric, tell us a little bit more about where people can find your work and, stay plugged in with these articles you're writing.
Sure. Yeah, I think probably the easiest ways to just sign up for my free newsletter or Substack, which is called Labor Politics. So if you just Google labor politics, it should pop up. I put out all my new articles there. And then I have a new book coming out in February, as you mentioned, which is We Are the Union, how worker-to-worker organizing is revitalizing labor. And so, I think those are two things to kind of keep your eye out for. But then just more generally, that, as I mentioned, the main organizing project I'm part of, which I would encourage people out listening, if you're not already sort of familiar, to volunteer for or to lean on if you want support in organizing your workplace, is EWOC, Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. So literally, if any of you want to volunteer for the labor movement, supporting new workers organizing, we will train you up in doing so. And so you can just go to the EWOC website, which is organizeworkers.org. But then also, if you're a worker and you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, now is the time. I've been on the fence, but I think I could try to organize my workplace. EWOC will connect you with an experienced organizer, and will also help you connect eventually with a union once you have an organizing committee and you've taken the first steps. So I think those are the main things I'm involved in these days. And yeah, I hope you all, if you're not already, take this moment to seize what is, really a pivotal moment in U.S. history, right? If the labor movement doesn't fight back, certainly I don't think the Democratic Party establishment has any plans at this point or any vision for how we can overcome what's going on in this country. So I think it's really up to us and incumbent on us to seize the moment.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Eric. Great place to leave it. Eric Blanc, I really appreciate you taking some time to spend with us today. Thanks again, and we'll catch up with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, folks. Eric Blanc, and again, his new book is coming out in February, as he said. We Are the Union, How Worker-to-Worker Organizing is Revitalizing Labor and Winning Big. I do encourage folks to check out his Substack and just follow what he's reading or what he's putting out there. He's one of those folks, much like Hamilton Nolan, that I try to follow pretty regular just to see, kind of what are the questions that they are posing and the thoughts they're provoking. And, whether you always agree with their analysis or not, I think is, besides the point of the value of what he is doing and others are doing in this labor media space, because, we don't get much coverage in regular media. And, I find myself often disappointed inside the labor institutions by how infrequently we're having these sort of big picture conversations. I would like to have these big picture conversations a lot more inside unions. We should be realizing the crisis that we're in. And I don't always see that's being reflected. So I appreciate folks like Eric sounding the alarm and also just, painting the picture of how and why we should go big in our new organizing.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.